She found her photo as a missing girl and discovered her whole life was a lie. Started after a 6-year-old called Eaton Patz went missing in Manhattan on May 25, 1979, while walking to the bus stop. It was only 2 blocks from the house, but he never made it there. His mother Julie called 911 as soon as she learned he hadn't arrived at school. As the hours turned into days, Titans, the photo was displayed on news reports, glued to telephone poles, and eventually put on the side of milk cartons in 1985, the very first dairy to put a missing child's image on. The side of its carton was Anderson and Erickson Dairy in September 1984 in Iowa, after a paperboy called Johnny Gosh vanished. But Eaton's case went countrywide, as more and more dairies adopted the campaign also. If you have not done so already, inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now back to the story. The police fully supported this, as it helped them reach hundreds of thousands of US citizens each morning. As they sat down to have breakfast, there were 1,600 independent dairies in the country, and by the start of 1985, 700 of them were on board trying to locate abducted children. President Reagan deemed May 25 National Missing Children's Day, as this was the day that Eaton disappeared on his way to school. Sadly, his story doesn't have a happy ending, and his killer was finally convicted in 2017. This tale tells the story of Bonnie Lohman, a sweet 7-year-old girl who lived an unconventional life with her mother and father. Her life was changed forever when she spotted a milk carton that made her stop in her tracks. Bonnie lived on an island. Most people haven't heard of Bonnie. Was a typical kid who was naturally curious and loved to play. But unlike most children her age, she had never been to school. Her upbringing was atypical, but she was oblivious to the fact that she was unlike others. She had led a rather nomadic lifestyle, living with her parents in Hawaii and then on the tiny island of Saipan. This relatively unknown place was part of the Northern Mariana Islands, that is a US Commonwealth in the Pacific Ocean. It has a tiny population of fewer than 60,000 and is known for its sandy beaches and mountainous landscapes. There was a little-known battle here in 1944, but most people don't even know of its existence. Eventually, after living in basic shacks and enjoying island life during her early years, the small family of 3 settled in Colorado and lived a quiet and unassuming life. Bonnie filled her days with toys and games, playing on her own or with her parents, and on a few rare occasions at her neighbor's house in their small neighborhood. It was a simple and fun childhood with no drama and very little excitement. She was rarely allowed to go outside, but she knew no different. Bonnie was a happy girl, and she didn't know what she was missing out by not going to school. She didn't know how to read or write and couldn't do basic arithmetic. Not that she was aware of what other children her age were doing. The one place Bonnie was allowed to visit that always made her happy. Colorado was a fun place for Bonnie, even though it lacked the beaches that she'd grown up with. During her time on the 2 islands, her parents loved her dearly, and she had settled well in their new home. Even though she wasn't allowed outside very often, she looked forward to the rare occasions where she was allowed to join one of her parents on a trip to buy groceries. Bonnie always looked forward to those outings and would stare at all the items in the grocery store. She loved all the colorful packaging, even though she couldn't read what was written on them. One day, Bonnie's father called out that it was time for another grocery trip, and Bonnie was allowed to go with him. Her face lit up, and she raced to put her shoes on. As they made their way to the store, Bonnie took in the sights and sounds around her. She loved these adventures, especially as they happened so infrequently. She savored every moment she was out and about with her dad. Bonnie knew to be on her best behavior, or she wouldn't be allowed to come out on future excursions. As Bonnie headed down the various aisles in the convenience store, she took in all the colors and shapes of the food and drink wrapping. She headed to the cool refrigerated section and looked at the numerous rows of yogurts, creams and milk cartons. Suddenly her eyes were drawn to one milk carton. In particular, she couldn't stop staring. There was a photograph of a young girl imprinted on the side of it that looked so familiar. Bonnie recognizes the person in the photo, but what would her father think? The black and white image was that of a girl who was much younger than Bonnie. Unbeknownst to her, the girl in the photo was 3 years old. It didn't take long for Bonnie to realize that this girl on the side of the milk carton was a younger version of herself. She was mesmerized. She waited for her father to approach the dairy section and excitedly pointed up at the carton with sheer delight. She hoped he would be as delighted as she was about this amazing discovery. She wanted to take a closer look. Would her father let her have this incredible find? Bonnie held her breath. Her father remained silent and handed the carton to her. She loved seeing the photo of herself displayed so prominently on the packaging. This was one of the most exciting things to have happened in her short life, and she was thrilled. She begged her father to buy it for her. He looked at her for a long time before making his decision. After what felt like an eternity, a smile went across his face, and he said he'd buy it for her, but it would come with one very strict condition. Her father asked Bonnie to do one important thing, but would she obey? When they came back home, the pair sat in the kitchen and drank from the special carton. Bonnie couldn't stop staring at the photograph and felt famous. Her father gave her a stern stare and told her that he would cut out the image. So long as she promised to do one thing, he would let her keep the photo, but only if she swore she would never show it to anyone else, not even her mother. Bonnie would do anything to have the photo in her possession, so she quickly Swore to her father that she would keep the promise. Bonnie was used to following rules and keeping secrets. Her father knew that if Bonnie made a promise she would keep it. She had proven herself repeatedly in the past, so he had no reason to think she was lying to her. She didn't ask him about any of the words on the carton, just staying transfixed on the photograph. When the carton was empty, her dad grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut the whole side of the carton out for her. She had no idea that the word missing was on the photo she'd been given. Bonnie treasured the photo, but had an idea that it was so important. Bonnie was too young to know about the milk carton campaign and was just delighted to have been given the photo to keep in her possession. She obeyed her father's wishes and kept it hidden from everyone, including her mom. The delightful young girl went back to her usual day of playing and using her imagination to while away the hours. She was proud that she didn't say anything to her mother when she came back home and knew that her father would be pleased that she was following his strict rule. Bonnie was so happy, and the photo went everywhere with her. The day that would change everything had started normally, with one exciting difference. One day Bonnie was allowed to go to one of the neighbors' houses to play. She loved heading there, even though it didn't happen very often. She was allowed to take some of her favorite toys to their house to play with. Bonnie put her chosen toys into a small box and headed next door for an afternoon of fun, and of course, she took her prized photo with her too. She made sure to hide it at the bottom of the box to keep her promise to her father. She didn't want the neighbors seeing it. Bonnie had a wonderful time at the house. She loved the change of scenery, as sometimes she got bored of staring at the same walls of the family home. Being at her neighbor's house was such fun, and the hours passed far too quickly. When the time came for her to return home, she said her goodbyes and went back to her parents. She'd had a lovely time and was grateful that she'd been allowed to spend her afternoon there. What Bonnie hadn't realized was that she'd completely forgotten to bring the box of toys with her. The neighbor discovered the box of toys and was about to return it to Bonnie when she suddenly spotted the black and white image inside. She stared at it, taking in the importance of what she was looking at. The photo looked like a much younger version of Bonnie holding a teddy bear, and the word missing screamed out at her. The description underneath gave Bonnie's name, date of birth, height and weight. It also had the date that she went missing. The neighbor couldn't believe what she was reading. There was a final line at the bottom of the photo that said relationships mother in Reno, Nevada. As the fact sank in, there was only one course of action that this woman could take. She reached for the phone and started to dial. In an instant she was connected to the police and put through to an officer. The words fell out of her mouth as she scrambled to give them the details as quickly as possible. She was petrified that Bonnie's parents would realize that the box and photo were still in her house. It was a race against time, and Bonnie's life was at stake as the friendly interrogation grew tenser. The police knew what they had to do. Within minutes the police were at her door to see the photo in person. As soon as it was examined they went next door to ask the husband and wife about their daughter. The police were cautious not to freak them out in case they panicked and endangered Bonnie's life in any way. The officers calmly sat with Bonnie's parents and asked them a few simple questions about when they had arrived in Colorado, what they did for a living. But the questions soon turned to Bonnie, and the officers observed the couple getting twitchy and anxious. The police knew they had to take action. The couple was promptly arrested and Bonnie was taken to the police station. One of the officers called the number on the carton and was eventually connected with a man who identified himself as Bonnie's father. He was stunned to hear from someone in Colorado when he heard that they were calling about a missing child. He struggled to get the words out. The man started sobbing and asked if Bonnie was okay. He was told that she was safe, and well, as the conversation continued, it quickly became apparent that Bonnie had been lied to for most of her life. The man she had called dad was not her biological father. The sad tale of a broken relationship and a mother's desperate decision. It transpired that when she was just 3 years old, Bonnie had been at the center of a bitter custodial dispute that her mother had lost. Refusing to obey the court ruling, Bonnie's mother had abducted her from their hometown of Reno and disappeared. Bonnie's father was absolutely distraught and put up posters of his little girl wherever he could. He asked the police for help, but as it was a domestic dispute they decided not to interfere. He was devastated by that decision and asked the milk carton campaign to put Bonnie's photo and details on the side of a carton. He knew it was a long shot, but he was willing to do anything to get her back. Usually only photos of kidnapped children were put onto the cartons, but he pleaded with those responsible for the campaign to make an exception for this little girl. Whatever he said obviously worked. It was only because of his sheer grit and determination that he prevailed. It's still unknown why Bonnie's stepfather decided to buy the carton for her. Many presumed that it was a mix of arrogance and confidence, thinking that Bonnie could keep it hidden and would never learn how to read. Bonnie was immediately reunited with her father 4 years after being abducted. It was a miracle that her face had been put on cartons that were delivered to that particular grocery store in Colorado, and it was a sheer fluke that Bonnie had accidentally left it for someone else to find years later. Bonnie was interviewed about her time spent unknowingly on the run with her mother and stepfather. She was asked about her time in Saipan and Hawaii, as well as the many rules she was made to follow to avoid being recognized. She had absolutely no idea that she was being looked for by her loving father, someone she had little recollection of. "I wasn't kidnapped by strangers. I was kidnapped by people that loved me," she said. Charges were filed against her mother mother and stepfather, but that was of no concern to Bonnie. Her life was now all about being back with her father and learning who he was after so many years apart and almost no memory of him. Her father told reporters that he had never stopped looking for her and never given up hope of one day being reunited with her. He was adamant that someone somewhere would recognize her from the many photos that have been distributed. Throughout the states on the whole, the milk carton campaign had been unsuccessful, bringing home only 2 of the 200 children displayed on nearly 5 billion cartons, as well as 1 pizza box on the back of envelopes. Thankfully, one of those found was Bonnie. The scheme was eventually phased out, being replaced by Amber Alerts in 1996. This new program sent text-showed messages on billboards and displayed alerts on the front of buses. It's proven to be one of the most efficient ways of spreading details about a missing child as quickly as possible. But Bonnie's father will always be grateful for the milk carton campaign.